I love the Sega Genesis. I mean, I kinda have to, it was my first. My introduction to video games, and what a way to start. The Genesis, or Mega Drive for all my non-Americans, is by my estimation a real all-timer, one of the best. While generally well regarded, I do find it lacks the prestige of something like the Super Nintendo in modern discourse though. Most gamers, young and old, are painfully aware of just how many absolute bangers are on Nintendo's 16-bit machine, and rightfully so. No shade from me, that library is legendary. The Genesis, in my experience, is often seen by those same gamers as little more than that console where Sonic got started, and that is a real shame to me. Less because of my nostalgia or anything, and more because I feel people are missing out on the breadth of great titles available on the machine, even with Sega making sure a lot of their marquee titles are available on newer platforms more often than not. Today, I aim to change that. Here, I've compiled 20 Genesis or Mega Drive games that I think are pretty cool and worth your time. Before we jump in proper though, let's clarify what this video is not. This is not the 20 all-time most best ever Genesis games, nor is it 20 Genesis games you never played or even heard about. I can't claim you've never heard of these titles, and a game not being on this list doesn't make it lesser quality than one that I have included. This is, simply put, 20 Genesis games in no particular order that I think are pretty great. That said, I did try to steer clear of many of the more well-worn staples of some of the best of lists you see online. I just didn't see much value in adding to the mountain of praise that Sonic and Streets of Rage already get. You don't need me to tell you those are good. There will be some familiar titles here, because I can't resist giving some of these their flowers, but if you see a game here that's recommended a bunch already elsewhere, there's probably a reason for that. We'll also be looking at official releases only, no hacks or homebrews this time. Imports, however, are on the table, and any Japan-only titles on this list should have fan-made English patches available online. Alright, that's our housekeeping done. Let's get started. In this home release of Sega's own 1990 arcade brawler, you take on the role of Garth, Karen, or Scooter the Robot, also known as the Alien Busters. A race of evil shape-shifting aliens has descended on planet Earth, and it's up to the Alien Busters to, well, bust them. Alien Storm is one of many beat-em-ups on the console, but what really makes it stand out is its speed. Your characters book it in this game, and the standard jump you find in most beat-em-ups is replaced with a roll here that has you clearing the entire screen with the press of a button. Double tapping forward before roll also results in a cool jump that can see you raining death on enemies from above with the right timing, and that's on top of your usual running attack and standard combo. The game is very fast-paced, but still tight and responsive, and really emphasizes the crowd control element of the genre through your movement options and generous attack hitboxes. The energy meter also adds an interesting wrinkle to the gameplay, as it governs your screen-clearing bomb, but also will deplete slightly with normal attacks, so you could end up with no ammo and a worse moveset if you spam your screen clear. The feel of the combat alone would be enough to give this one a look, but Alien Storm also breaks things up with run and gun and gallery shooter stages to keep things fresh. Both of these game modes are fun in their own right, and the gallery shooter stages in particular being the main way you restore health and energy through blasting the environment to find hidden goodies. The enemy designs are also pretty awesome. You'll do battle with shape-shifting trash can slugs, weird little gremlin monsters, and masses of tentacles among others that all have a fun kind of claymation look to them. Your characters also animate in fun ways that see them cycling through several weapons over the course of their combos with extreme prejudice. Alien Storm moves at breakneck speed, and in 8 stages doesn't wear out its welcome. The soundtrack has that grungy twang the Genesis is known for that really works for this material, and 2-player co-op is a huge boon to a game like this. This one's a strong recommendation from me. An even earlier Sega published action platformer for the system, Mystic Defender sees the player in control of Joe Yamato, a sorcerer whose girlfriend has been kidnapped by the evil Zareth. Your typical save the girl story, of course, but Joe's specialization in magic gives Mystic Defender a very different feel from other games in the genre. Rather than a normal attack, Joe has access to spells that can be charged for greater effect, but only when jumping or standing still. You start with a basic chargeable energy blast, but as you progress you will find more spells like an aimable flamethrower, damaging AoE orbs, and even screen-clearing dragons to summon. Because of the limitation on when you can charge and how weak uncharged attacks are, swapping spells and finding places in the rhythm of combat and platforming to get to full power adds some tactical consideration to the proceedings, whether navigating levels or fighting bosses. The stages were clearly designed with Joe's different spells in mind, and Mystic Defender controls really well overall, with none of that slippery feeling you get in lesser platform games. Aesthetically, Mystic Defender looks pretty good for its 1989 release. This one was originally based on the Kujaku o anime in Japan, before having the license sanded off for localization. The anime adaptation roots are still very much felt in the design of both Joe and the grotesque creatures he does battle with. Most of the monsters and environments are pretty gnarly in the best way. The Rogues Gallery specifically is an interesting mix of demons and body horror creatures, and who doesn't love a good flesh wall? This one isn't overly long and always felt like a stiff but fair challenge during my runs of it, and the opening cutscene and little stage transitions are a nice touch. Overall, I found Mystic Defender good for a playthrough or two if you're in the mood for a solid side-scroller. From one spellslinger to another, this is Twinkle Tale, a Japan-only title that follows Saria, an apprentice magician on a quest to save her land and captured mentors from an evil sorcerer. Twinkle Tale is a top-down run-and-gun shooter. Our little magician has access to 3 different types of magical projectile that can be switched between on the fly for different situations. We have a high-damage straight shot, and then less damaging spread and homing options. Each can be powered up twice by collecting these symbols, and we lose a level for whatever weapon we have equipped when we take a hit. This could be seen as overly punishing, but Saria has a 3-hit health bar to start, and Twinkle Tale is actually pretty generous with power-ups, health items, and screen-clearing bombs. Damage also only depowers the weapon you're currently using without affecting the others, so it's possible to keep powerful weapons in reserve for when you're on the back foot. Twinkle Tale is far from easy, but that mechanical leniency goes a long way in making this one feel like a fair challenge to me. One touch in particular I enjoyed is how the boss encounters lock Saria's aim forward like a standard shmup, which allows the player to focus exclusively on dodging without having to worry about shooting the wrong way. To put it plainly, Twinkle Tale has some of the nicest art direction on the console. Saria herself and the enemies are super cute, and the pixel art of the overworld map looks like something right out of the prettiest RPGs of the era. The soundtrack also goes hard and is one of my favorites on the system. Twinkle Tale is top quality stuff, and I highly recommend tracking down the fan-made English patch of this Japan-only Mega Drive title, as it's well worth your time. Great game. The next Mega Drive import on my list is about a very different kind of magical girl. Bishoujo Senshi Sailor Moon is a side-scrolling beat-em-up based on the first season of the legendary anime. The original 5 Sailor Scouts are playable here, each with a basic combo, jumping and charge attacks, and of course, a desperation move that costs health. While there is no running in the game, double tapping a direction and the jump button performs a long jump that's great for getting around and adds a cool little flourish to jump attacks. In addition to those basic moves, each scout is further differentiated by fighting game style button command specials. Mercury, for example, has this cool uppercut, while Jupiter, as the powerhouse, can ground pound and spin throw enemies. Venus, meanwhile, would like you to know that this is a beam. Adding all this together makes each of the 5 girls feel different enough to warrant multiple playthroughs, especially with each scout having different mid-stage dialogue and endings. I'm also going to highly recommend pulling up an FAQ for the special moves as you get started, to get a feel for each of the Sailor Senshi's full potential. The presentation here is genuinely great as well. Picking a character even gives you a small transformation sequence right out of the show. The game also sports cutscenes to contextualize the action, and the pixel art in these things is excellent. The game overall has a very attractive and clean look, with some pretty large character sprites. The soundtrack is also very catchy, if a bit subdued. Fan of the show or not, Sailor Moon is a quality beat-em-up. It is single player only, which is a little bit of a bummer, but the large roster and multiple endings still make Sailor Moon on Mega Drive a great pick for beat-em-up fans. I highly recommend the fan-made English patch for this one. From the moon to the stars, let's talk about Sega's other mascot platformer on the Genesis. Ristar came out in 1995, very late in the Genesis lifespan, and it shows. The game is beautiful, one of the best looking games of its generation as far as I'm concerned, and the soundtrack by Nights into Dreams composer Tomoko Sasaki is one of the best on the system. Ristar is clearly the result of the folks at Sega flexing their mastery of the Genesis hardware, and that expertise and execution extends to the gameplay just as much. Mechanically, Ristar is very simple. He can jump and he can grab. The grabbing mechanic is really the star, no pun intended, of the show here. Ristar's arms have a stretch and tension to them, and he can reach out and grab in 8 directions. When he does grab onto something, the tension snap launches him forward, and that momentum can be used to headbutt enemies or fly off in different directions. Slamming into enemies and slingshot grappling around with Ristar's extendable arms feels amazing. As a core mechanic in traversal and boss fights, the stretch and grab gameplay feels fully realized. A simple but great idea well executed by a team well and truly familiar with the tools they're working with. Ristar isn't a hidden gem or anything. Most people will tell you this one is good, but it is a must-play for platformer fans as far as I'm concerned. Speaking of gems, hidden or otherwise, this is Columns. This one's about as simple as it gets. A falling block puzzler where connecting 3 or more of the same color or shape disappears those gems and causes whatever is left to fall. If that fall triggers more matches, well, that's a combo and that's more points. I really like games like this, and Column's satisfying sound effects and disarming soundtrack have an almost hypnotic effect on me. Just look at them fall. Yeah. Wait, what was I doing? Oh, I gotta get back to the list. And what better way to get back on the clock than with the bounty hunting baddies of Vic Tokai's Troubleshooter. Also known as Battlemania in Japan, Troubleshooter sees the player controlling jetpacked mercenaries Madison and Crystal as they blast their way through 6 stages of horizontally scrolling shooter action. Madison is our main character here, with Crystal providing backup, and being able to shift on the fly between covering Madison's 6 or concentrated frontal fire. Before each stage, the duo picks a powerful special weapon that recharges on a cooldown. These special weapons can all behave quite differently, and getting the most out of them is going to come from experimentation and replaying stages to figure out which tool is best for what job. Between swapping Crystal's position and managing your recharging weapon, Troubleshooter has a very different feel than most entries in the genre. The game is also served well by its very 80s anime art style, and the aesthetics of Troubleshooter really make it stand out in a sea of similar games where you almost always control some kind of spaceship. The lighthearted tone is great, and the conversations and pre-stage menus really work overtime here to bring the whole experience together. I'm also a huge fan of Madison's lines when you pick up a power-up or a health item, and the way the game tells you to get ready for more trouble when you finish the stage. Troubleshooter is just a really charming little game. There is also a Japanese exclusive Mega Drive sequel called Battlemania Daiginjo that does have an English fan patch floating around online if you're interested. The sequel is also great. It has higher quality pixel art, but I do prefer the art direction of the first one. Both versions of Battlemania also have actually good box art instead of whatever happened here for the Western release. Yeah, it's not great. You know what has good box art though? Cadash. Yeah, drink it in. Cadash is a side-scrolling fantasy action game with a hefty dose of RPG. The player selects either a sword-wielding fighter or a spell-slinging mage on a journey to defeat a big evil demon and save the princess. Yes, we are once again saving a princess, so let's name our character and get out there. 3 letters. While Cadash wins no originality points for its story, the gameplay mix of side-scrolling hack and slash and RPG make for a really fun playthrough. As you journey through Cadash's underworld and defeat enemies, you will gain experience and level up. The two characters are also quite different from each other. The fighter's sturdiness and attack speed contrast nicely with the more frail mage and his growing kit of versatile spells. Leveling up feels great in this game, and helping NPCs you meet along the way for items, and buying supplies alongside new gear in towns, really adds to that overall feeling of adventure and progression. The gear even changes how your character looks, which I am a huge sucker for in these kinds of older adventure games. Cadash sports tight control, large attractive sprites, atmospheric environments, and a really catchy soundtrack. As a port of the 1989 Taito arcade game of the same name, I often see this Genesis version overlooked or disparaged due to some cuts from the arcade release, most notably two additional characters, the ninja and priest. Even with those exclusions, I find this Genesis port nicer to play and look at than the PC Engine conversion that retained all the characters, and I've never been able to enjoy the arcade release as much due to the ticking time limit that this Genesis port thankfully removed. It's also worth noting that one of those two characters is a woman, and I'm told that that's like DEI or something. Porting differences aside, Cadash is a really fun sword and sorcery adventure on the console. It's also a pretty easy playthrough if you grind up a little and backtrack to inns to rest up when you're tired out. Most people, given some careful adventuring, can see this one through to the end. Definitely worth a look for adventure fans. Let's keep that sword at the ready for our next one, but how about we switch the perspective? Crusader of Centy is a top-down action-adventure game. This style of game is not hugely represented on the platform, and it would be easy to cynically assume Centy's frequent placement on Genesis Best Of lists is based on that novelty alone, or some kind of tokenism, a means to elevate the Genesis as a machine with more variety in its library than is often assumed. Viewed in that light, from the outside, Crusader of Centy could easily be mediocre and still get nods from Sega diehards as a winner of a race no one else showed up for. Well, you can put those fears right to bed because Crusader of Centy is awesome. You're a kid on an adventure. That's what we're doing here, and honestly, that's a good enough hook for me. You can look right at this gameplay and know more or less exactly what to expect from this kind of game, and Centy does it very well. Where this one sets itself apart is the boomerang-like sword throw you get early on, and the number of different collectible animal companions that join you on your adventure. Both are used to solve puzzles for progression, and the latter augment your fighting abilities, and can even be combined in fun ways. Combat feels good, the soundtrack is excellent, and the pixel art is on point. I'm also a big fan of the overall map that breaks up the stages and facilitates backtracking once you've gotten a few abilities under your belt. This is just a really well-made 16-bit adventure, and feels in many ways like the Super Nintendo fans' Genesis game, and I mean that in the best way possible. Crusader of Centy is quality stuff. Do not make the mistake of skipping this one. Our next game, however, is one I do often see people make the mistake of skipping. It's wild to say a beat 'em up as high quality as TMNT The Hyperstone Heist is underrated, but it is. Less so for any fault of the game itself, and more because it's often compared to Turtles in Time on Super Nintendo, which is, for the record, rightfully one of the most beloved beat 'em ups of its era. It's odd, because you would think any fan of Turtles in Time would enjoy more of what it offers, which is what Hyperstone Heist is, but that's not how these conversations usually go. There's this weird need to pit these sister games against each other and pick a winner, and more importantly, a loser. I don't know if that's just deep-seated console war goofiness or what, but we no longer have to choose, guys. We can just play the games. And you should. Hyperstone Heist is great. I know not everyone will agree with me here, but I think both 16-bit Turtles beat-em-ups are about on par with each other. While the SNES game has nicer colors and better stages, the Genesis release allows players to run at the press of a button, which makes the game feel way better to me to actually play. Both games are highly enjoyable brawlers, and include the same basic movesets of combos, running attacks, and dive kicks. You may enjoy one more than the other, but I have a hard time saying one of these two is truly better, let alone calling either of them the bad one. I just see them as alternate takes on the same fun formula, and I don't know, I'm just happy we have two exceptional 16-bit Konami TMNT beat-em-ups to play. If you haven't checked out the Hyperstone Heist yet, all I can say is it's a shell of a time. Konami's output on the system, however, was not just limited to turtle-based brawling. The publisher actually showed out with excellent entries in their Contra and Castlevania series as well. Contra Hardcore and Castlevania Bloodlines are awesome, but you probably didn't need me to tell you that, which is why they're not on this list. Do play them if you haven't though. Excellent games. To be honest, Rocket Knight Adventures here isn't exactly hurting for praise either, but as an exclusive title that truly understands and embodies that Sega Genesis spirit, I'm sorry, I gotta give this little guy his flowers. Rocket Knight Adventures is quality. You can feel it as soon as you get your hands on the game. Our main character, the jetpacked possum knight Sparkster, controls like a dream, and the mechanics are the definition of easy to pick up, but hard to master. Sparkster can jump and swing his projectile launching sword. That single attack button can also be held to charge our knight's titular rocket, and once released, launches the possum paladin in whatever direction is held, sword first. This attack is fast, and foregoing fast single slashes to charge up before ripping through a line of enemies, flying through the air, or bouncing off walls like a pinball never stops being satisfying. The game's breakneck pace makes that decision to stop and charge feel like even more of an expert move, since it's so easy to get swept up in the go-go-go of Rocket Knight's set-piece filled stages. It's just too tempting to want to mash out sword swipes at the barrage of evil pigs and mechs that make up the enemy forces. The tight controls and little gameplay touches, like how you can do a damaging defensive spin by releasing charge without any direction, or how the sword attack has a sweet spot where the bladed projectile will hit multiple times, makes Rocket Knight Adventures a game of skill expression alongside the spectacle of its set pieces, all with extremely charming character designs and sprite art. This is an all-timer. Simple as. Play it like yesterday. The Jetpack Joyride isn't over yet, because next up, we're talking about Ranger X. This side-scrolling mech action shooter is easily one of the coolest games on the console. While it may look like any other run and gun at first glance, Ranger X actually stands out in a few key areas. First, the controls. Ranger X sports a unique 3-button control scheme that has separate fire buttons for your 2 horizontal directions. These buttons are also how you turn around, and the D-pad allows for movement in all 8 directions with the use of your mech suit's jetpack, which is governed by an overheat gauge. These controls can take some getting used to, but work quite well once you've gotten some time on them. You really do feel less like you're controlling any other side-scrolling character, and more like you're actually piloting a mech suit. It's such an awesome example of how a less immediately intuitive control scheme can add to the overall feel and atmosphere of a game. Ranger X also sports vehicles that add an extra layer to combat and level navigation. For instance, Indra, the bike from the earlier levels, can be combined with for much faster ground movement and concentrated fire, but can also be worked with in tandem to attack from multiple angles. The vehicles are also how you swap out and recharge your limited use special weapons, and the combined form has its own health bar separate from Ranger X's health pool when flying solo. Managing the 2 health bars and their placement makes the vehicles feel like an integral part of your kit, as opposed to just an afterthought. Ranger X is a difficult game, but between your mech movement, special weapons, and vehicles, it's really fun and satisfying to find the right tool for whatever comes up. The levels are a mix of search and destroy challenges where you use a radar to hunt down your targets, and some pretty awesome boss fights. The presentation is also on point here, with a great soundtrack and some truly impressive and gritty visuals. Ranger X is definitely a fully realized experience on Genesis and worth checking out, especially if you're in the mood for something a little different than your average side-scroller, or just think mechs and a little anime influence is really cool. I certainly think some anime influence is cool, so of course I was instantly drawn to Arcus Odyssey. This is a Wolf Team joint. For the uninitiated, Wolf Team had a pretty diverse catalog of games in the late 80s and early 90s, before going on to become Namco Tales Studio in 1995, and working on that series all the way until Tales of Xillia in 2011. Their output as Wolf Team was certainly diverse, but was always a little frustrating for me personally. Games like Valis and El Viento, for instance, have striking art direction, but far less satisfying gameplay in my opinion. They end up being fine, games I want to love, but could never really bring myself to. That disparity always stung me a little, because these games always look so cool. In that way, Wolf Team's output, to me at least, always felt like a promise unfulfilled. Then I played Arcus Odyssey. This one's a fantasy action game, where up to 2 players can choose from 4 different characters to stop an evil witch from taking over the world. The action plays out in isometric, and I'm a big fan of how differently each character plays. Our default warrior Jeddah attacks with wave sword slashes. The warrior woman, Erin, swings a whip in wide arcs. The elf archer Diana can bounce her arrows off walls, and Bede, the mage, can of course attack with his magical projectiles. Magic is not limited to that latter character though. You power it up by collecting and using crystals, and each character's magic levels mean access to different spells. I'm gonna say a scan of the manual comes highly recommended for this one to learn more of the gory details of each character's magic, and to take in the gorgeous character art. Level progression comes from helping NPCs, finding keys, and defeating bosses. While exploring the maze-like levels, you can also find a wide variety of different magical items and even rescue additional characters to aid you in combat. Arcus Odyssey is honestly just a really fun game to play and explore, and I am pumped to finally find a Wolf Team game that actually plays as well as it looks. This one gets a strong recommendation from me, even if it's not quite the RPG the Japanese box says it is. I'd call Shining Force an RPG though. I'd call it a pretty good one too. Shining Force is a turn-based tactical strategy RPG. The player names and takes on the role of a hero and leader of the titular Shining Force. An army of monsters is descending on the kingdoms of man, and it's up to the Shining Force to meet them in battle. Battles play out on a grid, with each individual character getting a turn to move and act. The strategy comes in as you move your units around the battlefield to get in range and do damage, while keeping your team alive. Between melee fighters, ranged archers, offensive casters, and dedicated healers, each unit has a specialty, and a place to shine in battle. You have to be careful in this one though. The enemies do a surprisingly good job of setting up bottlenecks and pincer attacks for careless players to rush into and get slaughtered. There were a number of times in my own playthrough where seemingly impossible encounters became very doable with some patience and careful thought, and the specialization of your units almost makes them feel like pieces in each battle's puzzle. Each character can bring a weapon and 3 items into battle, and which items you outfit your team with, whether healing items or stat boosting accessories, add another level of strategy and planning. I found Shining Force to be quite challenging, but you can revive fallen characters at churches and escape battles with any experience and gold you've earned if things prove too tough, so grinding is possible to even out the challenge if you feel like you're in too deep. Character progression is linear, with units learning spells and abilities and gaining stats based on what their class is. At level 10 onward, a character can be promoted, which resets their levels but gives them a new class with even greater potential. I'm a big fan of how these class changes reflect on the character sprites. This is also true for the weapons you equip as well, and that's a pretty awesome detail to see in a game from 1992. The art in general is really great, and I like how centaurs and other animal hybrids are just de facto races in this setting. The battle sprites and animations are excellent, and I really enjoy the game's storybook-esque art style. Important characters have character portraits, which add that little extra to dialogue scenes. It also signposts recruitable characters, and for me, feeds into my desire to catch them all the second I see someone important enough to get this treatment, since some units require a little convincing to join your cause. The cumbersome inventory management is my only real gripe with Shining Force, but the game has so much charm and such satisfying progression that it was very difficult to tear myself away to work on this video once I started playing. If you're a fan of 16-bit RPGs and haven't tried this one out yet, you should, even if its sequel is talked about way more. I don't ever really hear anyone talk about Mystical Fighter, but this Japanese mythology-themed beat-em-up is pretty great. You play as a kabuki warrior and fight your way through the underworld, battling everything from samurai, ninja, and sumo wrestlers to more supernatural threats like Gaki or Oni. Mystical Fighter is a very atmospheric game. The drab color palette wasn't doing much for me at first, but it grew on me as I saw more of the game, and between the visuals and sound, I think they really nailed the darker tone they were going for with this one. That darker and very Japanese atmosphere gives Mystical Fighter a unique feel compared to other beat-em-ups on the platform. The game also controls really well. You have jump and attack buttons like you would expect, but your kabuki is actually very mobile, and moving around in general feels awesome and is super responsive. You can double tap forward for a quick step dash, and hold it down to roll indefinitely. Pressing attack out of the roll does a sliding kick that keeps your roll momentum and never stops being satisfying to do. Mystical Fighter also has a unique spin on grabs. When walking up and grabbing an enemy, you can toss them in different directions or into pits like in any beat 'em up, but holding down the attack button causes you to spin and drain that enemy's health while hitting any bad guys dumb enough enough to get close to you before flinging them. This technique drains your own health, but is worth the trade-off and super fun to do. Health items, which of course had to be sushi platters, also have a pretty novel mechanic to them, where you can be overhealed past your starting HP instead of them just giving you points or whatever when your health is full. Your screen clear is activated by cashing out these consumable scroll pickups, and gets more impressive looking and damaging the more you have stocked up. Mystical Fighter is an often overlooked but very playable brawler on Genesis, and I recommend it if you've already played the usual beat 'em up suspects and want to try something a little different, especially if you can bring along a buddy for co-op. Speaking of, I was surprised to discover that collecting buddies is actually a core mechanic of the late Genesis top-down adventure game Beyond Oasis. In this one, players take on the role of Prince Ali, who is beckoned by a golden armlet to collect elemental spirits and do battle with a rival silver armlet wielder for the fate of his kingdom. Right away, we got a quest with stakes, and a rival. Sign me up. Beyond Oasis plays out like most games in the genre, with dungeons, keys, and enemies to slash up, but with some genuinely novel twists on the formula. The spirits Ali is questing for can be summoned once recruited by tagging the environment with the golden armlet. The water spirit, Ditto for instance, can be called forth by tagging lakes, waterfalls, and puddles. Meanwhile, the fiery Ifrit will appear from torches or bonfires. Once summoned, they fight alongside Ali while draining the magic meter over time, and dip when it's depleted. Even more of that magic meter can be spent on performing spells with a press, double tap, or hold of the gauntlet button when a spirit is out. These can be projectiles, AoE screen clears, or even healing spells depending on the partner. Outside of combat, spirits and their elemental effects will also be used to solve puzzles for progression. It's a solid hook, and the partners and magic meter management make for a fun twist on this kind of game. Another addition to Beyond Oasis I quite enjoyed was the inclusion of items. You can find and hold a limited number of food items to restore health and magic, which can come in handy as the difficulty ramps up further into the adventure. There are also a number of additional weapons available, such as swords, crossbows, and bombs. These all have limited ammo or durability, but tend to be higher damage or provide a little more utility than Ali's trusty dagger. The deteriorating weapons and MP management give the combat a more scrappy, adapt and improvise feel when compared to other games of this type. Ali can also run by double tapping a direction and perform special fighting moves like a running slash, jump kicks, and even special moves performed by holding down attack and spinning the D-pad. This awesome move, done by holding attack and pressing forward, back, and forward, is easily my favorite of them. It's just really cool. Beyond Oasis sports some great animation, and its Arabian Nights inspired setting is fairly unique for a game like this. The game is also pretty good about guiding you forward through dialogue and the in-game map, making for a straightforward adventure that's easy to recommend to pretty much anyone who enjoys these kinds of games. The Arabian Nights inspired stylings and elemental spirit rescuing continue with Monster World 4. Like Beyond Oasis, Monster World 4 is a later release for the console, but unlike that previous game, we're side-scrolling for this adventure. Up front, I'll say that aesthetically, this is one of my favorite games on the platform. I love this game's color palette, the environments, monsters, character designs, everything. Monster World 4 is simply a masterclass in beautiful sprite art. I'm a huge fan of the main character Asha's design, and her animations for things like opening chests, crawling in tunnels, or just jumping are adorable. The music is also just listen to it. Even the game over screens can't help but have this fun energy to them. Monster World 4 plays as good as it looks and sounds. The controls are tight and responsive. Asha can run, jump, and attack with her sword. While jumping, she even gets access to up and down stabs. You also have a shield you can defend with by holding down on the D-pad. Early on, Asha gets a companion, a creature called Pepalagoo. This cute little guy can fly, and Asha can grab onto him to help with platforming and even throw him to help solve puzzles. Chests contain items and money, and that money is spent in towns on equipment upgrades, potions, and the like. There's also 150 drops of life scattered throughout the game that increase your max health every time you collect 10. Exploration and its rewards are very worthwhile in Monster World 4. This is just a fun world to hang out in, and the game's dungeons have unique puzzle and platform mechanics and are usually capped off with a fun boss fight. For the longest time, Monster World 4 was one of the Japanese Mega Drive's best kept secrets. It finally got a digital-only official localization in 2012, but with the Wii Virtual Console having long since been shut down, and the PS3 store only up till Sony decides to finally take it behind the barn and put it out of its misery, it's worth noting that there are also some fan translations of the original game online if you care to look. There was also a remake for modern machines in 2021 called Wonder Boy, Asha and Monster World, that trades out the original pixel art for 2.5D polygons. This is definitely not a replacement for the original game, but having played a little of it, it's cute and pretty fun, but substantially easier than the Mega Drive version. I think the remake is worth checking out, but don't skip the original. It's easily one of the Mega Drive's best games, and well worth the time. If you liked that ponytailed and partner-trusting heroine, then maybe this next game is... Listen, I'm really sorry. I'm just running out of energy for these segues. I'm just gonna talk about the game now. Alisia Dragoon is great. Game art's perhaps best known for the Lunar and Grandia games, brought us this one in 1992, and there's a lot to like about it. As Alisia, the player fights through platforming action stages and battles monsters using her lightning magic. The electricity shoots from Alisia's hands at the press of a button and automatically targets any enemy in range. If Alisia goes for any length of time without attacking, the lightning charges up and becomes much more powerful, culminating in a devastating 360-degree sweep when the power meter is full. I've said before that I really enjoy these kinds of attack now versus charge up for more power later mechanics in action games, and that remains true here. The lightning can even be leveled up by collecting power-ups as you play, which is very satisfying. As fun and well thought out as the lightning blasting is, Alisia Dragoon's gameplay has an equally interesting mechanic alongside it, that being the use of her 4 companion critters. We got a dragon, a raven, a lizard, and a little fireball guy. Alisia's buddies will attack alongside her of their own accord, and each has their own little way of attacking that can level up and get stronger with the collection of power-ups. Your friends also have health bars and can block shots, using their own HP to cover for Alisia. What makes this all work so well is the pet's health and strength levels will have you making interesting decisions in regards to who gets the level up or health item, and whether it's time to bench a monster you've been investing in or crutching on as he nears death, and you risk losing him until you find a revive. That kind of decision making is the backbone of an engaging combat system, and Alisia Dragoon remains engaging to play throughout because of it. The game looks awesome as well. The sprites aren't huge or anything, but are nicely detailed, and the stages in particular look great with their multiple background layers and scrolling. There's clearly a lot of care put into the small details like the cool stage transition screens and story presentation. Alisia Dragoon is a quality Sega Genesis title, not an underrated game by any means, but still a standout exclusive on Sega's console. Another quality exclusive that isn't anywhere near underrated is, of course, Gunstar Heroes. Any and every best of Genesis list includes this one, and there is a reason. Treasure's run and gun shooter is just extremely good. While I probably couldn't say anything new about Gunstar Heroes if I wanted to, I can tell you why it appeals to me and what makes it a must-play on the console. For starters, the controls. They're tight and responsive, of course, but the number of movement options the player characters have are standout for the genre. You can slide, climb, dive, wall jump, throw enemies, and aim in all directions. You can even choose between stationary, finer aiming, or less precise but more mobile shooting in the options based on your preferred playstyle. There are 4 weapons in the game, and the player can pick up 2 at a time and swap between them, or even combine them together into a 3rd unique weapon on the fly. When you add the 4 basic weapons and all possible combinations, that's 20 weapons total at your disposal. This weapon system rules, and experimenting to find your favorite combination, whether it's a doubled up machine gun, a short range explosive, or a homing laser, is ridiculously satisfying. Level design and pacing are also exceptional. You'll be taking part in crazy set pieces, like sliding down a pyramid or battling out on top of a plane, as often as you'll be running to the right and blasting everything. The frequent boss and mini-boss encounters come at you fast and switch things up well, with some bosses, like Seven Force, being easily some of the best you'll see on Genesis. Gunstar Heroes just refuses to let you get bored, and the distinct but high-quality art style makes our main characters and each major villain stand out. The game in general is just very nice to look at, and even the basic grunts and environments have a ton of personality. The soundtrack also scores the action well, and to top it all off, you can play the whole game through with a friend in co-op. It would be really easy, I think, to write off Gunstar Heroes if your exposure to the game begins and ends at video clips and lists like this. Like, oh, I get it, it's one of those kind of games, calm down, how good could it be? Maybe even build up a resentment for this game that people just will not shut up about during discussion of this console's library. I promise there is a reason for it. Gunstar Heroes is, for myself and many fans of the Genesis, everything this machine does best. It's fast, fun, and confident in what it is and who it's for. This is one for the real gamers. A video game as video game, if ever there was one, and an essential Genesis title. Simply one of the best. Last one on the list here is yet another game that many will tell you is great. I'm not exactly breaking new ground and praising Shinobi 3, but this is my list, and I'm not about to have this kind of video end without me gassing up the quintessential 16-bit ninja action game. Shinobi 3 feels just amazing to control. Our protagonist, Joe Musashi's primary method of attack is throwing kunai, but he can also use his sword when up close and personal. He can run with a double tap of the D-pad, and while in the air, he can dive kick by hitting down and attack. The non-kunai attacks Joe can do, like running sword slashes, are quite powerful, but are also performed with the same button that throws kunai, based on his action and position relative to enemies when the button is pressed. You can treat the game like a running gun if you'd like, just hucking and replenishing kunai constantly, but truly skilled play sees full use of Joe's moveset, with the best players never needing to throw a single one. The game even rewards you for this at the end of stages with the Shinobi bonus. Learning the ins and outs of playing this one at a higher skill level is the thing that makes Shinobi 3 so addictive to me. Joe Musashi is just that fun to control. This focus on optional challenge means that the game is actually pretty accessible for anyone not looking to be all tryhard about it, and as a result, a casual playthrough is actually very doable for most skill levels with a little bit of practice. The game won't just roll over for you, but I find it much more forgiving than many other games of this era and type. Truly the people's ninja game. Shinobi 3 is also all in on the ninja fantasy, and it's evident from the moment you boot up the game. You're immediately running through a forest, dodging shuriken and intercepting enemy ninja as they leap at you from the trees, before jumping up sheer cave walls and playing hit and run on a heavily armored samurai boss. After that, you're on horseback and fighting more enemy ninja as they leap off kites in pursuit of you, as you head to a military base to single-handedly take down their army of horrific bioweapon experiments. And that's just the first 3 stages. The whole game is just like that. You go and get up to ninja activities and it rules. The art direction is so on point in this one too, and the music? This is simply one of the coolest games ever made, and it's an easy recommendation to any action game enjoyer. Play Shinobi 3. Whew, what a ride. As I said at the top of this video, this was never an attempt to definitively name the best games on the console or the most underrated or anything like that. This is simply 20 games that I really enjoy and I think do something cool enough to be worth looking at. I think it's a pretty eclectic mix. You may know all these already or may have never heard of any of them. Either way, I hope this was entertaining, and if you made it all the way here, thank you for watching. Truly. I think call to actions are kind of cringe, but I am genuinely curious and would love to see some comments on this one. What are some of your favorite Genesis games? I'd love to see some of y'all's recommendations. Did anything on this list stick out to you? Did I turn you on to anything new here? I would love to hear about it. I just started this channel a couple months ago, and I just wanted to say that I'm really appreciative of how nice everyone has been in the comments and all of the support I've gotten. Y'all are the best. Thank you for taking the time to watch my stuff, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next one. Till then, play some games, have some fun, and be good to each other. Thanks again for watching.